a forgotten umbrella, a phone call under a store awning, and a security camera system designed to catch employee theft that ended up exposing the most brazen betrayal of my marriage. Sometimes the technology meant to protect your business reveals the lies destroying your personal life. This story happened several years ago, but I remember it was a Tuesday, and I remember that detail because the weekend that started the following Friday would play a decisive role in everything that followed. My wife Angela had been suggesting all week that I should visit my parents in the neighboring city. What was particularly noteworthy was that she insisted I should go alone, and by Tuesday, she'd crystallized her final, and as it turned out, last proposal for our marriage. "I'm planning to go to the mountains this weekend with some relatives," she announced. "I'm taking Rebecca from work, my divorced friend, and we're going to drive straight from work on Friday to a mountain resort for the weekend. This way, we can kill two birds with one stone. You can visit your parents, since you haven't seen them in ages, and I can get some time off work while our daughter gets to spend time with her grandparents." "Thanks for the suggestion," I told her, and at that moment I didn't sense any deception from her. I'll be honest, I wasn't opposed to spending some time apart. Our relationship had been, to put it mildly, cool for quite some time. By the time she suggested we spend the weekend separately, our marriage was in full winter mode. Let me take a few seconds to explain our family situation, because these details will become important later. This was a second marriage for both of us. We each had one child from our previous relationships. My son lived with his mother but visited us frequently, while Angela's daughter lived with us full-time. We hadn't planned on having children together, and as it turned out later, that was probably for the best. As the weekend approached, I noticed something that made me suspicious for the first time. Angela was getting happier and more excited with each passing day. I thought to myself, it's just a mountain trip with some relatives and her divorced friend Rebecca. What's there to be so excited about? As it turned out, there was plenty to be excited about. On Thursday evening, we were sitting in the kitchen when I needed to check the weather forecast. For the next day, I might need to drive to another city for work on Friday. I reached for her phone to look up the weather. That's when I discovered her phone was password protected. Angela worked as a regular office manager, and her phone was always in her pocket. She never even carried it in her purse. It was constantly with her. She'd never felt the need to password protect it before. Although I realize now that almost everyone uses passwords on their phones. At the time, this seemed like a sudden and suspicious change. I wasn't too surprised that evening, though. I just walked to the living room, grabbed my own smartphone, and checked the weather there. Friday arrived, and it looked like rain might develop by afternoon. Angela suddenly needed an umbrella. As it happened, I had an umbrella in my car trunk, but I was at work at the time. "Come pick it up," I told her over the phone. I worked at an auto parts store, where I was something like an assistant manager. The owner, Sergey, definitely needed help because, and this becomes relevant to the story, he was constantly dealing with inventory theft. Sergey was a pretty interesting character, but he had one major problem. He couldn't stop employees from stealing merchandise. He was always finding discrepancies in the cash register and noticing that certain parts had a strange tendency to disappear right before inventory checks. An auto parts store is a challenging business when it comes to theft. There's plenty to steal, and there's always a market for car parts. Even if employees just took parts home for their own vehicles, it represented significant losses. Sergey couldn't get control of the situation. He'd conduct inventory audits constantly, sometimes twice in 6 months, but these disruptions cost him even more money because he had to close the store during each audit. He tried implementing electronic tracking systems, but that made things worse because the employees who worked for minimum wage couldn't handle the technology. His electronic tracking system nearly destroyed what was left of his inventory control. The final solution was video surveillance cameras everywhere, monitoring everyone and everything. We calculated the cost of installing cameras in all the storage areas, maintaining the recording systems, and servicing all the equipment. It was a substantial investment. I remember making a suggestion to Sergey that would later play a crucial role in my divorce. I said, "Sergey, what if we try a different approach? Cameras are great, but what if we raised everyone's salaries instead? With better pay, we might attract employees with more knowledge about auto parts and perhaps stronger moral principles. Our current salaries are rock bottom, which is why we're having these theft problems." Sergey disagreed. "Alex," he said, "salary and whether someone steals are completely unrelated. If theft is unacceptable to someone, they won't steal whether they're making $1 million or minimum wage. As for their knowledge about parts, most of our customers know exactly what they need anyway. Your suggestion isn't how this works." It was a debatable argument, but since the losses weren't mine and I wasn't paying the salaries, I offered my idea and let him do what he wanted. We installed the cameras anyway. Little did I know that these cameras would play a role in making me single again. Back to Friday. Angela arrived right on time to pick up the umbrella. I was in the main sales area, as I mentioned, distributing merchandise and explaining to employees how to properly catalog specific items. She walked into the sales area. "Just wait about 5 minutes," I told her. "Let me finish what I have on this table and then I'll go open the office for you." She stood there looking at oil filters for a while. Then I noticed she wasn't in the sales area anymore. I checked the other room, she wasn't there either. I walked to the office I shared with Sergey, where we had a monitor displaying all the video surveillance feeds. I looked at the screen and saw Angela standing outside under the store awning. It was starting to drizzle, and she'd obviously come for the umbrella I'd mentioned. She was standing outside our door, sheltered by the awning, talking on her phone. I needed to grab some lunch, so I put my food from home in the microwave and stood watching the monitor, waiting for her to finish her phone conversation. She came back inside, walked down the hallway, and as she passed through the sales area, I heard her say into her phone, "I can't wait to kiss you," and then she hung up. The outdoor cameras don't have audio, but one of the indoor cameras does, and I heard that phrase clearly. Maybe it's Rebecca, her friend, I started thinking. But Angela hadn't said that phrase in the tone she uses when talking to Rebecca. Her conversations with Rebecca usually get so animated they're almost shouting. This was different, confident, even condescending or mocking. Angela walked into the office. "There's your umbrella," I said, pointing to it. Then I asked to borrow her phone to call my own number because I couldn't find my phone. I opened her call log. The last call had been 45 minutes earlier to my number. The conversation I just witnessed on camera wasn't in her call log at all. It had vanished, apparently deleted immediately after the call, just like those auto parts that seem to disappear before inventory checks. Interesting, I thought. "Text me when you get to your parents'," my loving wife said as she rushed out. I sat in my chair, turning my fork in my hands, trying to figure out which direction to think and what was really happening here. I finished lunch and completed all my work. Then I got a text from Angela. "We made it safely. Couldn't reach you by phone, bad reception here. If you need anything, text instead of calling." Great. I immediately tried calling back, but her phone was already turned off. It was almost 4 p.m. I thought about calling Rebecca, the friend who'd supposedly gone on the same trip. Maybe she had a different carrier with better reception in the mountains. I called Rebecca's number, it rang, but she didn't answer. I tried again with the same result. Then I thought about Angela's daughter. I needed to know if she was at her grandparents' house or if I needed to drop her off there. I called the daughter, and she was already at her grandparents'. She said she'd eaten and talked to her mom, and everything was fine. Then she mentioned that she'd just talked to her mom a few minutes ago and that her mom had called from her regular phone number. All these coincidences started forming a very unpleasant picture. I got in my car and drove to, can you guess? The workplace of Rebecca, the divorced friend who was supposedly in the mountains with Angela and her relatives. I arrived at their shared workplace, opened the door to their office area, and there sat Rebecca, staring at me with wide eyes. "How's the weather at the mountain resort?" I asked. "And why aren't you answering your phone?" She started saying she didn't know anything. I said, "Where's Angela? You'd better tell me while I'm still being nice." She didn't say anything particularly helpful, but she did mention that Angela was her friend and she wouldn't betray her. But then she added, "You two figure this out yourselves. I'm not covering for anyone anymore. I'm tired of this drama." I drove home, and around 11 p.m. I received a text. The subscriber, Angela, was back online. By the time I got to my phone to call her back, she was already out of service range again. But apparently Rebecca had warned her that her husband was looking for her and that the whole mountain resort story had completely failed. Saturday passed with Angela remaining offline. By then, I figured I could confidently make some decisions. I quietly gathered all her belongings from around the house and moved them into a pile by the front door. She didn't return until Sunday. When she walked into the apartment, she wasn't surprised by what she saw. Rebecca had obviously told her everything. Angela sighed and started looking at her packed bags, trying to drag them toward the door. I asked, "Aren't you even ashamed?" "Well, actually, if we're being honest," she replied, "what do you want me to say? You can see for yourself what our relationship has been like lately. Besides, even if I tried to explain, you wouldn't believe me anyway." To my amazement, even after being caught almost red-handed, with witnesses and with her own behavior proving that I'd figured everything out correctly, she still wouldn't admit what had happened. She was apparently trying to leave herself room to maneuver in the future, in case I ever decided to talk about reconciliation or take her back. Here's what I realized. Those security cameras at work don't really prevent theft very effectively. But as it turned out, they're quite capable of detecting marital betrayal. The irony of this situation wasn't lost on me. Sergey had spent thousands of dollars on a surveillance system to catch employees stealing auto parts worth maybe $50 or $100 each. Instead, his cameras caught my wife stealing something much more valuable: my trust, my marriage, and my peace of mind. Looking back, I can see the signs I missed. Angela's excitement about the weekend wasn't about a mountain getaway with relatives. It was about a romantic weekend with someone else. The password on her phone wasn't about privacy, it was about hiding evidence. The deleted call logs weren't technical glitches, they were deliberate cover-ups. What struck me most was her complete lack of remorse when confronted. She didn't deny what had happened, but she didn't confess either. She chose a middle ground that acknowledged the obvious while maintaining plausible deniability. It was a calculated response from someone who'd clearly thought through multiple scenarios. The phrase I heard her say on that phone call, "I can't wait to kiss you," wasn't meant for Rebecca or any family member. It was meant for whoever she was planning to spend the weekend with while I was supposed to be visiting my parents in another city. Angela had orchestrated an elaborate deception. She'd arranged for her daughter to stay with grandparents, convinced me to leave town, recruited her friend Rebecca to provide cover, and planned what she thought would be the perfect crime. But she hadn't counted on needing an umbrella. She hadn't expected me to see her making that phone call on our security camera. And she certainly hadn't expected me to check her call logs and discover the deleted evidence. The most disappointing part wasn't the betrayal itself, it was the lack of courage to own up to it when caught. Someone who would lie so elaborately and then refuse to acknowledge the truth when confronted isn't someone you can build a future with. I learned that day that technology designed to solve one problem can accidentally solve completely different problems. Sergey's anti-theft cameras didn't stop employees from stealing auto parts, but they did help me discover that my wife was stealing from our marriage. Sometimes the most important discoveries happen when you're not looking for them. I went to work that Friday thinking about weather forecasts and umbrella. I ended up discovering that my marriage was over. Angela never did admit to the affair, even during our divorce proceedings months later. She maintained her position that I'd misunderstood what I'd seen and heard. But the evidence was clear. The deleted phone calls, the fake mountain trip, Rebecca's presence at work when she was supposed to be traveling, and most importantly, that phrase captured on audio. The security camera footage became a turning point not just in my marriage, but in how I understood the importance of paying attention to details. Small inconsistencies like password protecting a phone that had never been locked before, or being unusually excited about a routine trip can reveal much larger deceptions. If you've ever discovered betrayal through technology that was meant for something else entirely, you know how surreal that moment feels. You're looking for one thing and find something completely different, something that changes everything. And if you've ever been in a situation where someone was caught lying but still refused to admit the truth, you understand how frustrating that particular form of gaslighting can be. It's not enough to be deceived. You're also expected to doubt your own perceptions, even when the evidence is overwhelming. The next story I'll be sharing involves a discovery that makes Angela's security camera revelation look straightforward. Stay tuned, because sometimes the truth requires multiple revelations to fully understand the depth of deception you're dealing with.